Hey, and welcome back to Big Asian Energy. My name is John Wang. I'm the host, and today I'm also the guest because today is a very special episode. Because today, the book Big Asian Energy, my book, officially goes live. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, anywhere where you get books. I always love to support indie booksellers. So if you do have a local bookstore that carries this, please go get it from them. And if not, just call them and ask them to get some. Um, and today I wanted to take this time to share a little bit about my journey and how I came to write this book, as well as all like just full transparency, all the stuff that happens after you get a book deal. Because I wish somebody had told me so much of this before I started this journey. And I didn't realize how much I didn't know about book publishing, as well as just putting yourself out there. This has been a message, I would say, like Big Asian Energy, the simplified version of this is like, how do we break through, not just leadership barriers at work, but like our own internal barriers so that we could truly step into our unapologetic, most like powerful, confident, alive, aligned true selves, because that's really what this book's deeper mission is. Like, yes, we are going to dive in this book to talk about communication strategies and like how to get promoted and how to be seen as more impactful, more powerful. Like there's all of these like jam-packed tips and tricks and everything like that. But actually, I think that this goes a lot deeper and there's so much to talk about, because how the heck are you supposed to sum up Asians or Asian Americans or Asian diaspora into a single book? You literally can't. There's just so much for us to talk about. And so this book was written very much as a combination of existing research of the studies and actual real tested techniques that we have found over the years. When I say we, I mean is I hired a couple of research assistants to help me, put this together. I hired a therapist to help me, read through and give me feedback and help me put together the frameworks so that it's properly psychologist back. Not to mention, I had two psychologists, very kind people from the Yellow Chair Collective. By the way, I just want to say thank you. And if you ever get a chance to go work with the Yellow Chair Collective, they're incredible human beings who actually did a psych reading on it as well, because I wanted to make sure that everything I put in here has some kind of validation beyond just personal stories. I know you're wrong. I think personal stories are so powerful, are so great. There's tons of my own personal stories in there. But I think that for this to be a book that helps people, it needs to have something more. But this is all great. This past week has been intense. Like this has been one of I would say the most active weeks in so many ways. My article got published in the Wall Street Journal. I have a billboard with my picture and my book up in Times Square, which is nuts. It's in Times Square, y'all. Like you can go. I mean, to be fair, it's just like one of those screens that like rotates through a bunch of images, but like you could actually go to Times Square and see it. But it's just one of those things where if you take a look at that, the journey of how I got to this point, it feels so unbelievable to me. If you had told me when I first started this whole journey, if you told me when I was in high school that I was going to be the guy to write this, I would have laughed, because I was not somebody who I believed carried Big Asian energy, this kind of like unapologetic strength. I was a socially awkward kid. I was a quiet, and, like I taught myself how to speak up through, training and testing and personal experiments and reading books and going all of these kind of things. But when I first started, I was actually so socially awkward. And I always had this part of me that was, I think, I wouldn't say shy, because I think that nowadays it's very hard for anyone to believe that I was shy, but I think there was always a part of me that was afraid of being seen. And the idea that sparked the journey is really coming from that, because when we're talking about Big Asian energy, it's not just how to break through our work challenges to get promoted, to get better paid, and all these kind of things, to be seen as better leaders. But really, I think that at the core of it is, how do we stop hiding the potential that we have, the true strength that we have. And where does that come from? Is there reasons for why it is that, we looked at studies, for example, that showed percentages of Asian Americans who feel like they are hiding parts of themselves. And there's studies that show that an overwhelming majority, for example, do. They don't truly show up in the full potential or speak up in the way that they could because of environmental factors, because of the fact that, they're in a society that, for example, might not have accepted parts of who they were, especially in their early childhood or, early upbringing, etc. There's studies that show that there are culture gaps in how we communicate and how, for the most of us, we learned through the necessity of assimilation how to hide elements of our culture. And this is, anything from that first experience, that stereotypical first experience of like bringing your lunch to school and having people make fun of it, all the way through to realizing that, hey, if I'm applying to a certain college, I probably should, focus on the less quote unquote Asian stereotypical things about my application, all the way to work. And there's real reasons for that, because again, we also see studies that show when people showcase those parts of themselves, though their Asian culture, their Asian identity, et cetera. And I'm not even talking about like being so outward about it. I'm just talking about not whitewashing their names. They are less likely to get a callback at job interviews, or they're more likely to be told when they're applying to, let's say, a promotion or a leadership position that like, oh no, like you don't really fit our mold of what we think strong, powerful leaders could be. And this is a big one, right? Because when most people, I would say, when people think of what does it mean to be a powerful, strong leader? I would say most people probably don't think of Asian Americans. We have, these stereotypes in our minds of that leadership looks like, right? Like we have like, the strong, unflinching ideals of dominance and leadership. And oftentimes they look like people who look like, let's say, Tony Stark or, Steve Jobs or these kind of people. And there's this not just boldness or loudness attached to it. There's also oftentimes this sense of individualism. And if you're from a culture, let's say a collectivist culture, which most Asian Americans are, or have family ties to, that's a big part of it. So the start of the story, the start of this journey of writing this book began with that simple question of why are we not seen as leaders and how do we change that? And the reason that we tackled this as a question was really quite simple, because at the time I was working with these Asian American clients of mine. They were working at companies like Google and Microsoft or, Amazon. And an echoed story I kept hearing again and again and again was I went and I'm applying to, to a promotion, or I was talking to my boss and I heard things like, oh, you lack executive gravitas. You lack that je ne sais quoi of like leadership energy or whatever it is that gets used. And a lot of times when I hear these things, I'm always like, what does that even mean? Right? Like, what does gravitas mean? What does executive presence mean? And I realized that it essentially, again, it's a coded word, right? It's a coded word for this performance that we see of where it comes from. So at this time I was doing research, as just trying to help out my clients. And I found that there was a study that was done, and it's called the stereotype content model. And it was done by a group of social psychologists over, decades of work and research. It was originally published in 2002, but it's been updated and there's been more added to it. That found out that the majority of people, when they think of Asian Americans, they view us as being highly competent, good workers, but low on assertiveness, leadership, and warmth. And this is oftentimes an echo, right? There was an MIT study that was done talking about this as well, where they looked at the bamboo ceiling and, East Asians versus South Asians. And again, these are the same kind of stories that keep coming up again and again and again. And the social psychologists basically realize that when we meet people, we're almost always grading them on only two metrics: competence and warmth. That's it. when we meet somebody, our brain immediately goes and categorizes this person and go, how warm is this individual and how capable are they? So oftentimes, for example, rich people would be placed as high competence and low warmth. We kind of see this at a distance. And of course, Asian Americans, once again, fall into that category of high competence and low warmth. So as a result, there's a bamboo ceiling. And what is a bamboo ceiling? It's a leadership gap. So what they found was that Asian Americans are really well represented at the lower levels of many major companies. And this includes, by the way, companies in Silicon Valley, in law, in tech, medicine, all of these fields in which, again, somewhat stereotypically, Asian people like. And yet, at the same time, they're underrepresented in higher leadership positions, right? We're talking about like executives or board members, but also even higher level managers. We exist, certainly, especially if you work at a major tech company. We're there. We're definitely there. But yet, we're just seen as good workers and not good leaders. And this, by the way, again, is not just a stereotype. Ascend did a study about this specifically, and they polled all these different workers, and they asked, like, what stereotypes do you feel like is still most associated with Asian Americans? And again, it comes back up that we're not good leaders, that we're not decisive, that we're not powerful enough, but we are good workers. We're good at math. We're good at STEM. We understand hard work. And it, echoes these, we call model minority stereotypes. So that was the starting question, was like, why are we still facing this? Because it's something that whenever I talk to people, there's an echo of, I get it, right? When I talk to, it's an interesting thing because I've been doing interviews for the past, 2 months. Like I've just been doing podcast after podcast after podcast. And I found this to be really interesting because a lot of the white interviewers who talk to me will start with that question of like, well, why do you think that Asians, would have this? Like, what do you mean big Asian energy? Whereas almost all the Asian and Asian American interviewers are like, I get it. Like, I get it. I get what you're talking about. And it doesn't matter if I'm talking about the work stuff of being seen as, the only Asian in the room, or being seen as too quiet, or, perhaps like you're maybe a little bit more shy or not as outspoken. But even the deeper layer stuff that we talk about, which is, there's studies that, for example, show Asian Americans experience more imposter syndrome, or that Asian Americans often struggle with that belief that, whatever they are supposed to be good at isn't good enough. So we also looked at everything, including our childhood, our upbringing, styles like that. We do, of course, look at tiger parenting. And I really want to say this, by the way, because tiger parenting comes up time and time again whenever there are stereotypes about Asian parenting, and I want to call that out. It is just a stereotype. I mean, almost all the stereotypes that we are attached to are just stereotypes because there is no such thing as Asian Americans, right? Like, we're not a monolith. It is impossible to categorize us into a single field. So we cannot be, how do you sum up, what is it, like 60% of the planet, 2,000 different ethnicities, dozens of countries across Asia, South Asia, the Southeast Asia, East Asia, there's Central Asia, there's West Asia, and even North Asia, when you really think about it. Like, all of these are different culture, background, identities. How do we talk about all of them? And the truth is, you can't. There's just no way you can sum up more than half of the human population. But we could talk about being Asian because we're really only identified as being Asian when we're not in Asia, right? Like, and what I mean by that is, like, I grew up, in North America, but I was born in Taiwan. I was born in Taipei. And when I was growing up, I never identified as Asian because it's like identified as an Earthian. Like, you just wouldn't think of it. You identified as, oh, okay, whatever your parental background is, etc. And I think most Asian people do. Like, if you're Japanese, you don't say I'm Asian Japanese. You just say I'm Japanese. If you're Chinese, you say you're Chinese. But I think that once you become Asian American, once you've immigrated, once you've been to somewhere outside of Asia, suddenly the way that you are seen and the way that you experience these cultural differences becomes that much more clear, becomes much more visible, right? Because when I show up around my white friends, I can't just remove that identity, right? You could be a British immigrant to North America, and generally speaking, people might not know unless you have an accent or unless you identify yourself. So you don't get seen as a foreigner. You're not viewed by that first and unerasable metric, that box that people place you in, no matter how hard you try. It's just reality. So I had this idea and I went, I want to talk about all these things, which is an insane idea when you think about it. Because I was like, oh, like we got to talk about, like the bamboo ceiling. We got to talk about the struggles that we face, in dealing with being modern minorities and the perpetual foreigner syndrome. But we also need to talk about all the inner work stuff, because that's really what moves the needle, right? Because it's not just what to say, it's how you say it, it's how you show up and how you view yourself in these. And at the time, this was probably say 3-4 years ago now, I just had that idea. I just went, okay, somebody needs to write this book. I was looking for this book for my clients so I could give it to them, and I couldn't find it. It didn't exist. And so I did the next best thing. When you don't have a book, is you go to TikTok and you make videos about it, which is what I did. I started making videos. I started talking about these experiences, and some of them started to go viral. Some of them started to, baby viral, right? Like, I think these days they were seen by hundreds of thousands, which feels small in the greater context of social media these days. When you're looking at like Mr. Beast numbers. But they started to trend, they started to pick up, and there was an echo. And I was like, oh, okay, there's interest here. I started analyzing, for example, movies like Everything Everywhere All at Once, or movies like Turning Red, because I was fascinated by the way that they captured certain nuances about who we are that I think we don't talk about enough, like generational patterns and trauma, really, especially in movies like, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Like, I freaking love that movie. Such a great movie for that reason. And I started analyzing and talking about this, and that started to pick up, trend. So at a certain point, I just went, okay, this has got to be enough validation that somebody out there might absolutely consider this to be a good idea, and not just the crazy ramblings of a person talking to himself. And a friend of mine who had a book, Shalina, thanks so much. Couldn't have done this without you. Introduced me to her literary agent. And I put together, I went online and I Googled, this is pre-AI days. So I Googled what do you need to get a book? And someone on Google was like, you need to have a book proposal. So I wrote a book proposal and I said, basically, look, I think that this is something that we need to talk about. Asian Americans are still underrepresented, underrecognized, all these things. Like, we need to address this. But I don't just want to talk about the workplace. And I don't just want to talk about stereotypes and microaggressions and stuff like that, because I think that we understand that they exist. And I think that, yes, the tools are helpful. But for a lot of us, we don't really experience maybe the same degree of discrimination that is on the surface that our, past generations might have. Like, personally, like, yes, I've been called names and I've had racial slurs thrown at me, but generally speaking, it's not my day-to-day experience. I think that what's underneath, however, is a much bigger question. Like, the way that we show up, like, how often do we have a great idea, or how my clients, had a great idea, but didn't feel comfortable raising their hand in a group meeting, not because they're shy, but because they have such a high standard of what it is that deserves to be said, because that's a cultural value, right? Like, it's a cultural value in many collectivist cultures where it's like, well, you don't just raise your hand and talk about your feelings whenever you want. Like, that's rude. To be polite is to give other people space, especially your elders, especially those who are more senior than you. Like, that's a societal value that we understand. And it's a beautiful, powerful, amazing value of like respect and humility and, collectivist support and harmony. Like, these are great values. But if you are in a place in which those values aren't seen, heard, or recognized, they will hurt your chances of progression. And not just in work, they will hurt your chances at how you're seen in dates, right? Like that politeness might end up being seen as, oh, I wish, I was on a date with this person, with this guy, and I wish they were more confident. I wish they were just a little bit more assertive, in how they show up. And again, these are the same problem really at the core is that oftentimes our respectfulness, our humility, our value of hard work ends up causing us to be under-recognized because it's a different metric and standard when we show up. I put all of this, by the way, into this tape proposal. And I gave it to my now lit agent, and I still remember she looked at the book proposal and she was just like, "This is adorable. It's not a book proposal. I cannot use this." But I will connect you with the editor, and so I worked with the editor to help clean up the book proposal, and then we submitted it. It was an incredibly amazing thing that we had multiple offers from a bunch of different publishers, all of whom had great support and really great feedback. But there was one in particular at Tiny Rep Books, which is part of Penguin Random House, that really got it. That I felt like really connected with it. The lead editor who's in charge of it, she's also Asian American, and she understood some of the things that I'm talking about, and she's just really connected with it. And for that, I am forever grateful, Emmy, for your belief in me and your support. I just want to say that. So then comes the process. What happens after you get a book deal is that, they give you a proposal. I think it's like a bid, basically. It's almost like an auction where everyone puts in a bid on the same day. And then, we picked Tiny Rep because, these guys were amazing. Just absolutely love them. And then we got the book deal. I still remember the time that I got a call from my agent or a text message. And she's just like, we got the bid. And I was actually on a plane coming back from a public speaking event, from a corporate speaking event. And I remember just like doing this little dance in my seat, like bouncing up and down because I was so excited, but I also don't want to disturb other people. And once I got the book deal, it was so exciting. And then immediately following that, I was just like, oh my God, I have to write a book. And, I've never written a full book before, so this was new to me, and I never realized how much work it went into it. But it was one of the toughest emotional experiences I think I have ever gone through, because suddenly there's this infinite potential in front of you and an infinite amount of pressure to do it right, which truthfully, I don't think anyone truly can. So I was going to these, cafes, and I would bring my laptop and I would do the cafe writer thing, and I'll bring my laptop and I'll focus here. And I started writing, and I realized, oh my gosh, there are so many things I want to talk about. And I started taking these little Post-its and plotting them on my wall of like, okay, well, we got to talk about generational patterns. We got to talk about when it is that we feel like we need to hide ourselves because we're not seen as the same way by other people. I want to feel right about how so commonly there were these patterns that were showing up in my own clients who were, the fixers at their workplace, who, were the caretakers. And these kind of like a little bit almost like, I don't like to use the word people pleasing, but truthfully kind of like people pleasing, or they become chameleons, right? They shape shift to better fit the needs of those around them. And it became this massive thing. The current book, as it currently stands, let me just check in, is 69 pages long. I think that my first draft was like 500 pages. And I remember at the time, I sent a message to my editor, and I was like, I have 140,000 words. Like, what do I do? And she is like, absolutely do not send me 140,000 words. I do not want to read that. she capped me at like 90,000 words. And I'm like, okay, great. This will be the most research packed, impact packed book with as many techniques as I can put in. And yeah, so no, I think about it a year and a half later of back and forth of drafts, revisions, so much went into it. Again, Emmy was incredible. Um, and the book was done. And then I promptly felt lost, overwhelmed, empty, and somewhat depressed for about 3 months. Because nobody ever talks about this. But once you're done writing your book, it feels like you've lost a sense of purpose. Like for every morning for a year and a half, I got up and the first thing I did was I went and I wrote down all my ideas. And all of a sudden, there was nowhere for these ideas to go. And I actually felt myself disconnected. I took time off away from social media. I took time off away from any kind of work that was in my usual day-to-day coaching or training or workshops, etc., because it was just so hard to connect back to it until the past few months when the book is now in the last stage and getting to go out. And, a lot of the book talks about things like perfectionism and, that pressure to appear polished, because I think there is a few different things. One is that there's a survival and a safety need that comes from it, right? Like knowing how to appear polished is about how do we find our belonging in a place where that belonging is not always a given. And again, I want to say this just does not apply to everyone. This is a book that's specifically for the people that feel resonant to these messages, but it is not a book for every Asian. It is not a book about every Asian. Again, it's just not possible. We are such a complex, diverse group of people, and our experiences are so diverse. But for those who grew up where perfectionism was an expectation or their academic performance was something like, if you grew up with parents who put that as a major focus, and the only times that you got that support or validation or love or even like I'm proud of you moments were when you came in and like brought back a high grade or brought back an academic achievement. Like those kind of stories create an echo in how we show up in our everyday lives as adults. And I wanted to put that as part of the messaging because I think that we have to look at it because these are real things and real people experience it. And after all, I can only speak from my own lived experience and my clients' experiences that they've shared with me and the studies that I've done. But there's sufficient enough, I think, to show that there are trends and patterns. And that's what we go into. We dive into how that internal pressure that oftentimes comes from growing up in that environment, that familial, expectation can grow up to create the achiever stress, this kind of sense of like, oh, I have to, no matter what I show up as, I have to make sure that it's good enough. It's polished, right? There's that expectation of face culture that does exist often in Asian cultures. And when I say Asian cultures, because, as much as there's words like pride or, recognition or reputation, truthfully, face doesn't actually have an English direct translation. Like there's no such concept that's in the same way because our face is not just about our ego. Our face is about how we are seen and our families are seen. It's a reflection of our community. And I'll be honest, it is terrifying. Like even today, as I'm about to launch this book into the world, all I can think of on some of the tougher, confusing mornings is, oh my gosh, like what if I put this out there and, I trigger friends who are like, oh, like, Asians don't need help. Asians don't need a book. Like you guys have, so much wealth, which is a stereotype, so much intelligence and blah, 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 these positive stereotypes. But we don't realize the effects that they have underneath that we don't really demonstrate or talk about. But it's there. And I think that putting it out there and talking about it, even if it's imperfect, even if other people disagree, is part of it. So if you read the book and you're kind of like, John, I don't agree with most or part or of this, great. Tell me, or even better, go write a new book because my hope isn't that this is the one book that represents us, because good God, that's never going to happen. I hope that this is a book that helps a few people feel seen, heard, and that it will give them the tools to get ahead, like you, hopefully. Or it would inspire people to write more books and more ideas and more complexities and more nuances, because I think that the biggest part that I wish for our community is for more voices to be heard. And I'm such a deep believer that a rising tide raises all ships. So the book is coming out tomorrow. I am excited. I am nervous in it. Just to give you, I'm just going to tell you what's in the book very quickly as I flip through these pages. And then you let me know if this is something that resonates with you, I guess. We start off by talking about how Asian confidence hits different. We talk about how confidence is not a universal thing. Asian leadership styles look different. We have different ways of showing up. We talk about what it means to be Asian and Asian American because it's such a loaded, massive term. We dive into what it feels like to be, the child of a tiger parent or the child of an immigrant parent. Again, not universal experiences, but often shows up. We talk about patterns that show up, including the achiever patterns, the fixture patterns, the, chameleon patterns, ways in which we might try to be more palatable to those around us, especially when we are a minority in the group. We also talk about the most common self-sabotaging patterns that show up, things like self-sacrificing, self-diminishing, when you minimize your work, when you're talking to others. It sounds like humility, but oftentimes it actually has a deeper impact than you might realize. Or self-rejection, when you see an opportunity and you're either in the workplace, I want to go and, put myself up for it. And then you read the descriptions and you go, oh, I'm not good enough for that. But truthfully, somebody else who is maybe even less experienced than you, or less capable than you, ends up getting that role because they were taught that humility doesn't mean self-rejection. We talk about, the achievement monster. This is a big one. I think the achievement monster is such a big one. We talk about imposter syndrome, the studies on imposter syndrome, the self-diminishment that comes from that. The feeling of I have so much potential and the guilt for not meeting that potential. I think that's also a really important thing that has come up so often. The feeling of not good enough and why that might stem from our childhood experiences. If you had parents who often compared you to other family members, like your cousins, or even some random person that, they know from another family across the country. These are things that impact how we view ourselves. We talk about the achiever treadmill, which is a term that basically means, no matter how much you work, no matter what you get to, milestone you get to, as soon as you get that win, you immediately discount it and it becomes not good enough again. Or it's you have this idea that once I reach X, then everything will be great. And then yet when we get there, we immediately discount it and think, oh, it's not that big of a deal. We talk about self-sacrifice. Sacrifice is a really wrong value, I think, in Asian American or Asian communities and Asian cultures, like that self-sacrificing parent, that self-sacrificing friend. But we don't talk about how often that actually causes us to go into burnout, because we're often the person at the workplace who is always being given the, taking on other people's extra work because that's the expectation, right? Because oh yeah, give it to, Jane. Jane never says no. She always does the actual work. Let's just keep giving her more work. And that's just in the first section, how wide is that it might feel guilt-ridden to ask for help, and why it's so hard to receive help, especially if you've been conditioned to believe that true success and, true capability means that getting help is a weakness, right? These are common things that we often hear. We talk about ways that we might turn on our charmer selves or chameleon selves as a way of hiding our true feelings and that emotional messiness that oftentimes is not a celebrated value or virtue in our culture sometimes. And how, more importantly, how to overcome all of those things. There's so many studies and practices and, you know, actual physical exercises that help break that pattern immediately, including techniques and physical techniques that like breaks that thought process so that if you're just about to go on stage, just about to perform, public speaking or whatever it is, that won't hold you back. And that's just the first part. Like I said, I wanted this to be value packed because in the second part of the book, we dive deeper. We talk about how do we communicate. So this is where all like the really tangible stuff, like actual, like say this exactly, like this is exactly what you say to answer somebody who is like kind of diminishing you or putting you down at a meeting. Or how do you deal with people who try to cut you off and like try to like take your power away? And how do you like deal with that? And how do you handle difficult people? How do you deal with microaggressions? Right? How do you deal with subtle racism? How do you deal with people who, try to out alpha you and like, subtly put you down? Like, how do you deal with that in the moment that calls them out on it without you seeming loud or just so that without you seeming like you're trying to call them out on it, basically, because that's really also important. We talk about communication differences. By the way, I'm giving the full section of the book here. So we go quite deep. We talk about how there's high context versus low context communication styles, which impact how direct we can be and why it is that we might communicate less directly than other people from Western cultures. There's a ton of studies on this, by the way. We talk about how do we sound more powerful, even when we're not feeling certain or feeling confident, and how do we sound more assertive. We even talk about things like eye contact, body language, dealing with difficult people, comebacks, all that kind of stuff. Truly, there's literally like you could see like it's just like how to call out behavior respectfully, even with your boss, how to deal with I'm just stating the facts or microaggression. Like there are so how to speak your intentions, set boundaries, and all these things. How to say no better, the exact scripts to do so. There's so much of that just in that section, and then we dive deeper into building rapport. How do we come off as more likable? How do we build relationships with people where they want to come to you and not just you going to them all the time, right? How do we help people see our values and value? What I'm saying is that like be seen as a high value individual while at the same time appearing humble, because that's a core value of ours. Because the truth is that self-promotion doesn't have to look like bragging, right? There's ways that we can go about doing that. How do we handle blame? How do we handle people feeling want to put us down? And even how to talk to ourselves. A lot of practices there. And that's just a second chapter. That's a second section, not chapter, second section. Like I said, this book had a lot. Third section is all about community. And actually, this is where we dive deeper. We talk about family dynamics. We talk about how to deal with the difficulties with our families, with our parents. How do we truly be seen for who we are and ask for our needs without feeling like we're letting them down, without hurting their feelings? Maybe what you want is more autonomy. Maybe what you want is to be, making more of your choices for yourself. That's self-leadership. I share stories in here, for example, about a woman who was a VP of a major bank. And, she wanted to change jobs into, joining a major startup. And, she couldn't because she didn't know how to bring it to her dad, who was so proud of her for working on a major bank that she was just like, it's probably easier just to wait for my dad to die than to tell him the truth. So you can see how complex these relationships can be on our relationships with ourselves or our loved ones. So yeah, we talk about that there. We talk about the history of, dating, fetishization, emasculation, and how that impact how we're seen in love and relationships. Because I think love and relationships is how we show up and break barriers. But one of my favorite things really is also talking about family and the differences we face as Asians and our family dynamics, because they are different. And I feel like sometimes there's this view of like, oh, like you're either talking, smack about your parents or you have to respect them. And there's this internal conflict of like, well, I see what they did and how do I address that? And more importantly, how do I show up as a better parent to my own kids? These are all really important things. And understanding that just because your parents went through something that taught them to communicate the way that they do with you doesn't mean that you can or have to continuously take that on to pass it down to the next generation, right? So we got prompts in there diving into that. And finally, because I am just such a massive advocate for, doing that inner work, we talk about how to approach therapy. We talk about how to approach deeper work that allows us to show up that much more powerful and to be the author of your own story. So all of that in this one book. Yeah. Cool. I can now safely say that even if the book is not going to be everything for everyone, I hope that it's has something that will help resonate with you as a listener, as a reader, as somebody who's part of this community, because my end goal, my dream, really, I just want to see us rise. I just want there to be so much unstoppable force that when people think of Asian Americans, the first thing that they think of isn't good at math or, model minorities or quiet or, has interesting food or, oh yeah, I love K-pop, but rather, oh yeah, powerful, great leaders, strong, courageous, wow, like people I look up to and want to emulate, because that's really the goal. Is how do we be the best version, the most unapologetic versions of who we are, of ourselves, because we deserve to be, because your uniqueness, your light, and your potential deserves to be seen in the world. And I think that anything that helps us rise together is the end goal. So thank you for listening. Thank you for, hearing my story, for checking out the book. If you haven't already done so, if you do get a book and have any thoughts, please do leave a review. Whatever your thoughts are, I welcome it. This is a space for conversation. If you have any questions, send me a message, or send my team a message at team@bigasianenergy.com or john@bigasianenergy.com. I read both of those emails, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. I am so grateful to be here, and I'm so grateful for you. Until next time, this is John Wang at Big Asian Energy.